Let's just be honest with ourselves. The early to late 2000s were a horrible time for retro futuristic vehicles of their past counterparts. You get what I'm talking about. This right here is a Chevy SSR. It came with an LS2, right? It was absolutely fast, and it had plenty of aftermarket potential. But what drove people away from this horrible monstrosity was its looks. Well, GM attempted to go for a more retro look, but they flopped extremely hard. Like, this is... I don't care how much more powerful you can make this thing with a Whipple supercharger, a bigger cam, and I don't care. The fact of the matter is you can't haul nothing in this but ass, and it looked like it was addicted to the ugly stick. Jesus Christ. Then Plymouth came out of left field with the Plymouth Prowler, but the problem with this vehicle wasn't its looks. It absolutely scored in that department. It was absolutely underpowered. They could have at least threw the third gen Hemi under the hood of this thing, made some room under the engine bay, under the hood in the engine bay, and we could have had a 350 horsepower Plymouth Prowler, but they flopped. They just threw a trashy V6 in there. In fact, the whole car was basically a mix and mash of different parts from other vehicles in Dodge or Plymouth's lineup. Now, this is regarded as one of the first crossovers to ever roll off the assembly line. They should have kept it in the development stage because this too is an ugly ass vehicle. It's very ugly. Like, there's no amount of body modifications that you could do to this thing to unuglify it. I mean, that's just the cold-hearted truth. It was reliable as hell. Even came with a tent. But you couldn't pay no child, to let you drop them off in this thing. And speaking of Pontiac, this was created around the same time that, well, they were getting ready to go out of business, so they were getting desperate, thus causing them to do things like, well, transport over a whole lot of Holden Monaros, aka GTOs, and Holden Commodores, aka the Pontiac G8, the GXPs, the GTs, and stuff like that. So, and that didn't work. It didn't equate to sales. You just rebadged something. Meanwhile, Ford had rolled out in 2005 the S197 chassis code of Mustang GTs featuring the 4.6 3-valve and a 4-speed automatic transmission with the option to go with a 5-speed manual. Were these powerful? Absolutely not. In fact, the biggest issue with this were, well, the transmissions like to go out and the cam phasers. Then you fast forward to today, people want about $11,000 to $15,000 for this particular vehicle. Need I remind you, this is a vehicle that was supposed to make 300 horsepower from factory, but in actuality, it only made like 225, maybe 250 to the wheels. But I don't blame Ford considering the fact their biggest op discontinued in 2004. Yeah, the F-body, yeah, you wouldn't see another F-body to the 5th gen. That wouldn't be till like 2010. And I know we can honestly agree that the 5th gen Camaro is nastier than a pastor taking a gas station pill mid-service. And the crazy part about all of this is you have 4 different variants of the 5th gen Camaro. You have the V6, which is capable of 500 horsepower on stock internals with like a turbocharged or pro-charged setup. And then after that is when the fun began, because now you have the L99 and LS3 variants, which are 6.2s making 400 plus horsepower. Then you have the LSA supercharged ZL1, and that thing made 556 horsepower. And then you have the Z28 5th gen, which came with the LS7, and those are hard to find. Okay, but we need to take a look at 2005 because that year is very, very specific. You see, 2005 is when Chrysler came out with the Chrysler 300 and the 300C, right? The first Mopar vehicle to have a Hemi since like the 70s, I believe, right? Cool. Well, not only did they inadvertently start the horsepower wars of this generation, because let's face it, they did. Because if you look at the early 2000s, let's see who won the horsepower wars. The Terminator Cobra. But when 2005 got here, dog, it marked the start of everything. You see, because before the Chrysler 300, let's face it, Dodge and Chrysler weren't hitting on anything, and people sure didn't care for Plymouth. Then the guys at SRT decided, you know what? We finna give Dodge and Ford a run for their money. Then they came out with the 6.1 Hemi, followed that up with the 6.4 liter Hemi, then followed that up in 2015 with the 6.2 liter Hellcat making 707 horsepower and 650 foot-pounds of torque. But let's not be hasty. We're getting ahead of ourselves. My ADHD flying off the rails right now. Let's also not forget that the suspension on the 2005 to 2009 Chrysler 300 and the 2006 to 2009 Dodge Charger all came from Mercedes-Benz. The only thing that didn't come from Mercedes was the body panels and the freaking Hemi that was under the hood of these things. Which would literally mean the E55 AMG is a distant cousin to the Dodge and Chrysler lineup. I mean, let's look at it this way. This was the first Hellcat before the Hellcat even came around. This thing had a IHI supercharged 5.4 liter V8, making 519 pounds of torque. You fast forward years later to the first Hellcat, right? What do they all use? They use IHI superchargers. You know, of course, Ford had some hand in creating the Hellcat. You know, when they came out with the 662 horsepower GT500 of 2014, yeah, Dodge said, you know what, let's go on back to the laboratory, because they were supposed to come out with a 600 horsepower Dodge Challenger or Dodge Charger or something like that, right? But they never came to fruition. They went back into the lab, you know, threw a supercharger on this 6.2 and said, look, we're not going to play with nobody. We're the biggest and we're the baddest. And FYI, the Hellcat is not the biggest reason why the car culture died. You see, 2005 is when YouTube got here, December 2005, right? Okay, YouTube started paying people from 2007 to 2008, which is irrelevant to the point that I'm making, right? The thing is, clout chasers already existed. But when the age of social media got here, all of the things that people kept secret, like racing and things of that nature, street racing, people could get a glimpse of it from their phone. I mean, not from their phone, of course, but from their computer. You know, races all over the world. You can watch them from YouTube. And then, you know, around 2010 to like 2014, everything was reaching like a crescendo. Everybody had a wide body on their 350Z, their 370Z. Everybody had an SRT8. Everybody had Chrysler 300s, Dodge Magnums. Hell, what was also happening? You know, 2011, Ford came out with the Coyote engine. So that was a big deal too, because now you don't have to do hardly anything but put, you know, billet oil pump gears in it, stronger rods and pistons. And, you know, you have a 700 horsepower, well, 700 to 750 horsepower capable machine. You know, the most you can get off those stock rods and pistons would be like 650 or 600-ish. But then, you know, Ford decided to take that to the next level with the Gen 2 Coyote and the Gen 3, of course. This horsepower warfare is to blame for why the car culture pretty much died compared to the early 2000s. But when the Hellcat got here in 2015, they pretty much finished everything. Everybody set the bar incredibly high with these Hellcats. Now you got taking delivery of my Hellcat videos everywhere. You had people doing smaller upper pulley, bigger lower pulley setups on their Hellcats. You know, Hellcat wine mods, B-lock wheels. You know, long tube headers. And then when the BGE 6.4 liter Hemi blocks came out, now people have access to a much stronger block. So let me get rid of this Hellcat block and go with this stronger block. Now this thing is the basis for a lot of 1500 horsepower 426 Hemi builds, but that's an entirely different story. You know, people became numb to horsepower. You know, what started as social experiments from these car companies ended up in an all-out, you know, horsepower warfare. And we could all agree that for some time, the Terminator Cobra put up the biggest fight ever. We're talking about a Eaton supercharged 4.6 4-valve with the capacity to handle 4-digit horsepower numbers. Can handle 800 horsepower comfortably. But this is just another just rant, you know, just wanted to discuss some vehicles and stuff that I dislike, show my disdain for a few vehicles and stuff like that, and you know, kind of talk about the horsepower wars. You know, give y'all a longer than normal video. You know, if you stuck with me this long, understand that I love you. You know, put a chicken wing in the comment section. I love y'all. Make sure you subscribe if you're new here, and I'm gonna keep rolling these out every day for you guys. I love you all. Thank you.